The scent of roasted boar and spiced wine was thick in the air, a cloying cloud that did nothing to soothe the frantic pounding in my chest. My fingers, slick with nervous sweat, trembled around the heavy silver pitcher. Just pour the wine, smile, be invisible. That was the command Silas had drilled into me, his voice a venomous whisper in my memory. But the moment the great hall doors swung open and Alpha King Kyalan of the Silver Moon Dominion strode in, invisibility became an impossibility. It wasn't his size, though he was immense, a monolith of muscle and authority cloaked in dark furs. It wasn't the collective hush that fell over the boisterous hall, or the way every wolf, from the lowest omega to the highest beta, bowed their heads in deference. It was his eyes. The color of molten gold, they swept the room with an unnerving intensity, and when they landed on me, a lowly serving girl in borrowed robes, the world fractured. The pitcher slipped from my grasp, crashing against the stone floor in a deafening explosion of silver and crimson. My mission, my purpose, the very reason for my deception, to find the weakness in this tyrant and exploit it to free my sister, evaporated like mist in a scorching sun. Every instinct I possessed, every fiber of my being, screamed a single terrifying word that had never crossed my mind: mate. Wait, before the next revelation unfolds, if this mystery has already captivated you, let us know where you're following this story from. To ensure you don't miss unexpected claims, broken bonds, or awakenings under the moon, subscribe and stay close. Now, back to the scene. Panic, cold and sharp, sliced through the strange, paralyzing warmth that had flooded my veins. I dropped to my knees, fumbling with the shards of the broken pitcher as guards began to move toward me. Wine soaked into the hem of my drab dress, cold against my skin. "Forgive me, Alpha King," I stammered, keeping my head bowed, my face hidden behind a curtain of cheap, dyed brown hair. I couldn't look at him again. If I did, I would be lost completely, and my sister, Lyra, would pay the price for my failure. "Stand," a voice commanded. It was deep, resonant, a low growl that vibrated through the stone floor and up into my bones. It was not a request. Slowly, shakily, I rose to my feet, my eyes fixed on the intricate pattern of the wolf head sigil woven into the rug at his feet. I could feel his presence looming over me, a suffocating aura of power and ancient dominance. Silas had called him a butcher, a monster who had slaughtered the previous Alpha and his family to seize control. He had shown me crude drawings of the supposed atrocities, sworn that Kalen's reign was built on the bones of innocence. Looking at the tips of his leather boots, I tried to summon the hatred, the cold resolve that had fueled me for months. But all I could feel was the echo of that soul-shattering connection, a magnetic pull that urged me to lift my head, to meet that golden gaze once more. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice softer this time, yet no less powerful. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild drumbeat of terror and an inexplicable traitorous longing. My loyalty was to Lyra. My life was forfeit for hers. I had to remember the mission. I was Ilara of the Shadow Claw, not some nameless servant girl. But under his oppressive presence, my true name felt like a phantom whisper. I was whatever he commanded me to be. With a shuddering breath, I forced my chin up. His face was all hard angles and stark planes, framed by a mane of raven-black hair that fell past his shoulders. A faint tracery of scars marked the skin near his temple, disappearing into his hairline. He was brutally handsome, but it was the raw grief, the profound loneliness swimming in the depths of his golden eyes that struck me dumb. This was not the face of a gloating tyrant. This was the face of a man haunted by ghosts. My wolf, a creature I had suppressed and starved for years to remain hidden, stirred within me, whining softly, yearning to soothe the sorrow she saw in him. Kalen's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing his features. He took a step closer, and the air crackled with a tension so thick I could taste it. Pine, winter frost, and pure, undiluted male wolf. "What is your name?" The lie Silas had prepared for me tumbled from my lips, tasting like ash. "Lyra, my king." Using my sister's name felt like another betrayal, a fresh wound in a body already riddled with them. "Lyra," he repeated, the name a rough caress. He studied my face, his gaze so intense it felt as though he were peeling back my skin, layer by layer, searching for the soul beneath. "You are new here." "Yes, Alpha King, from the northern farmlands." Another lie. I was from the heart of the city, raised in the shadows of the very citadel I now sought to undermine. One of the guards stepped forward. "She is clumsy, my king. We will have her removed and disciplined." Kalen didn't take his eyes off me. He raised a hand, a gesture of dismissal to the guard. "No, she will stay." He turned his head slightly, his voice carrying easily across the silent hall to a stern-faced man with silver at his temples, his beta, Ronan. "Ronan, see to it that Lyra is reassigned. She will serve in my personal wing." A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Even Ronan's stoic expression wavered for a fraction of a second. A clumsy, unknown servant girl from the farmlands assigned to the Alpha King's private chambers? It was unheard of. It was a death sentence or a great honor, and I couldn't tell which. For my mission, it was a golden opportunity, the kind of access Silas had only dreamed of. For the terrified woman standing before this overwhelming force of nature, it felt like the closing of a trap. I am not worthy of such a post, my king," I whispered, the words a genuine plea. I needed distance to rebuild my walls, to remember the face of my captive sister and the hatred I was supposed to feel. A ghost of a smile, so faint it was barely there, touched Kaelin's lips. It did not reach his haunted eyes. "I will be the judge of that," he said softly. "Do not drop my wine again." With that, he turned and strode toward the high table, the assembly parting before him like a river around a great stone. The spell was broken. The hall erupted in cautious murmurs. Ronan approached me, his gaze cold and assessing. "Come with me," he ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. I followed him out of the great hall, my legs feeling like lead, my mind a whirlwind of chaos. The pull toward Kaelin was a physical ache in my chest, a burning cord that stretched taut with every step I took away from him. My wolf was howling in protest, clawing at the cage of my resolve. What had just happened? Shifter spoke of the mate bond in hushed, reverent tones, a sacred, unbreakable connection forged by the moon goddess herself. It was a myth to me, a fairy tale for the hopeful. I was a spy, a tool sharpened for a single purpose. I was not meant for fairy tales. And yet, I had looked into the eyes of my target, the man I was sent to destroy, and my soul had recognized his. My mission was no longer simple. It was a war, and it would be waged within my own heart. The days that followed were a special kind of torture. Ronan led me to a small, sparse room in the servants' quarters of the royal wing, my new home. My duties were simple. I was to deliver Kaelin's meals, tend to the fire in his chambers, and keep the rooms tidy. In reality, I was a prisoner under his direct observation. He was testing me, watching me, and I had no idea what he was looking for. Each morning, I entered his chambers before dawn, my heart a frantic bird in my ribs. He was often already awake, sitting in a large chair by the window, staring out at the mist-shrouded mountains. He rarely spoke to me, but I felt his eyes on me as I moved about the room, my feigned subservience a fragile shield against his unnerving scrutiny. The silence was heavy, thick with unspoken questions and the Cimmeray energy that now perpetually arced between us. It was a constant, low-grade hum beneath my skin, a siren song that drew my attention to the way the early morning light caught the black strands of his hair, the powerful set of his shoulders, the quiet sorrow that clung to him like a shroud. This was not the monster Silas had described. The tyrant who supposedly reveled in cruelty was a man who drank his tea black and strong, who had a worn copy of ancient poetry on his bedside table, and who sometimes forgot to eat the meals I brought him, lost in whatever thoughts plagued him. One afternoon, while clearing his uneaten lunch, I found him on the training grounds. He was sparring with his warriors, not as a king directing from the sidelines, but as a wolf in the thick of it. He moved with a brutal, breathtaking grace, a whirlwind of controlled violence. Yet, when a young, over-eager wolf managed to land a lucky blow, sending Kalen stumbling back, he didn't lash out. He laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that was so unexpected it stole my breath. He clapped the young wolf on the shoulder, offering a word of praise before demonstrating how to avoid the same mistake. He was a leader, not a despot. He was respected, not just feared. Every piece of evidence my own eyes gathered contradicted Silas's narrative. The lies were a poison I had swallowed, and now they were making me sick. My nights were spent in a torment of guilt. I would lie on my thin cot, the Alpha King scent, that intoxicating mix of pine and winter frost lingering on my clothes, and I would try to picture Lyra's face. My sweet, gentle sister who loved to press flowers and sing off-key. She was the reason I was here. I had to find something, anything, to use against him. My opportunity came on the 5th day. Kalen was called away to an urgent council meeting, one that Ronan had informed him would last for hours. "The girl will remain in your chambers," Ronan had said, his eyes on me. "She is not to leave until you return." It was a test, a baited trap, and I was going to walk right into it. Once I was sure he was gone, I began my search. My hands shook as I moved through his rooms, every footfall echoing like a drumbeat of my own treachery. I felt like a grave robber desecrating a sacred space. His personal effects were few, simple, functional things. There were no chests of gold, no opulent displays of wealth. I ran my fingers over the worn leather of his poetry book, my heart aching. Who was this man? This poet king who carried the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders and sadness in his soul. I moved to his desk, a large piece of dark polished wood. The surface was clear except for a stack of official-looking documents and an inkwell. I rifled through the documents quickly. Trade agreements, patrol schedules, border disputes, nothing. Frustrated, I started checking the drawers. The first 2 were unlocked, containing more mundane paperwork. The bottom right drawer was locked. My heart leaped. This was it. From a hidden seam in the hem of my dress, I retrieved the set of thin, delicate lockpicks Silas had given me. My fingers, usually so nimble, felt clumsy and stiff. I took a deep breath, forcing down the wave of self-loathing. For Lyra, I chanted in my head, the words a hollow mantra. The lock was complex, but Silas's training had been thorough. After a few tense moments, I heard a soft click. The drawer slid open. It wasn't what I expected. There were no secret ledgers, no maps detailing a planned invasion. There was only a single object, resting on a bed of black velvet. It was a child's toy, a small, crudely carved wooden wolf, its paint faded and worn smooth from countless hours in a tiny hand. Beneath it lay a lock of silver blonde hair, tied with a simple blue ribbon. A wave of cold dread washed over me. This was a memorial, a shrine to a lost child. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked behind me. I froze, my blood turning to ice. I didn't have to turn around to know who was there. The air had grown thick, charged with an oppressive, dangerous energy. His scent filled my senses, but this time it was different. The comforting aroma of pine was sharpened by the acrid tang of rage. "What?" Kalen's voice was a low, deadly rumble, stripped of all its earlier softness. "Do you think you are doing?" I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the killing blow. I had failed, I had been caught, and I had desecrated the memory of his child. I deserved whatever was coming. Slowly, I turned to face him, the open drawer a glaring testament to my betrayal. His face was a mask of cold fury, but it was his eyes that terrified me. The warm gold had been extinguished, replaced by the blazing, predatory light of his inner wolf. The man was gone. Only the alpha remained. My voice was a useless, broken thing. The lies I had so carefully constructed crumbled to dust in the face of his silent, glacial rage. "You were what?" he snarled, taking a slow, deliberate step toward me. "Searching for something? A weakness, perhaps? A secret to sell to your master?" My breath hitched. He knew, or he suspected. "I don't know what you mean." He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound that scraped against my raw nerves. "Don't you? The clumsy servant girl who appears from nowhere." The girl whose scent is a carefully constructed lie, herbs and lye soap to cover the smell of fear. The girl who looks at me with the eyes of a spy, but whose wolf calls to mine. He was in front of me now, his sheer size eclipsing the light from the window. He reached out, not to strike me, but to gently cup my jaw, his calloused thumb stroking my cheek. The unexpected tenderness was more terrifying than any blow. His eyes bored into mine, and I saw a flash of the profound loneliness again, now mingled with a fresh, raw betrayal. "I do not know who sent you," he whispered, his voice dangerously soft. "But they made a grave miscalculation. They sent a wolf to spy on a wolf, and they sent my mate to betray me." The word hung in the air between us, a shocking, impossible truth. He knew. He had felt it too. My carefully constructed world shattered into a million pieces. The truth was out, and I was trapped between my mission and the man who was my other half. "Who are you?" he demanded, his grip tightening almost imperceptibly. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and shameful. "My name is Alara," I confessed, the name feeling foreign on my own tongue. "I was sent to find a way to destroy you." The pain that flashed in his eyes was a physical blow. He looked as though I had plunged a knife straight into his heart. He released me, stumbling back a step, his face a canvas of anguish and fury. "And did you find one?" he asked, his voice hoarse. I glanced back at the open drawer, at the pathetic, heartbreaking shrine within. A child's toy and a lock of hair. This wasn't a weakness. It was a source of unimaginable strength, the kind born from surviving the deepest of sorrows. "No," I whispered, the truth absolute and unequivocal. "I found a king, a grieving father. I found you." his jaw clenched, a muscle working furiously. For a long moment, he just stared at me, the silence stretching into an eternity. I saw the battle raging within him, the alpha's fury, the wolf's instinct, the man's pain. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow, devoid of all emotion. "Ronan!" he bellowed. The beta was there in an instant, his eyes taking in the scene. The open drawer, my terrified face, his alpha's barely contained rage. He didn't need an explanation. "Take her to the dungeons," Kalen commanded, turning his back on me, unable to look at me any longer. "She is a spy and a traitor. She will be interrogated at dawn." Ronan grabbed my arm in a grip of steel. As he dragged me from the room, I looked back at Kalen's broad, unmoving back. My wolf howled, a desperate, silent cry of loss. The bond, that fragile, shimmering thread that had connected us, felt as though it had been violently ripped apart. I had been sent to find a weakness, and I had found one. It wasn't his. It was mine. The dungeons were as cold and damp as a tomb. Ronan shoved me into a small, windowless cell, the heavy iron door slamming shut with a sound of finality. Plunged into near-total darkness, I slid down the rough stone wall to the floor, wrapping my arms around my knees. The interrogation at dawn. I knew what that meant. They would use wolfsbane and silver to strip away my defenses, to peel the truth from my mind layer by painful layer. They would learn about Silas, about the Shadowclaw Syndicate, and about Lyra. And when they had everything they needed, they would execute me. A part of me welcomed it. I deserved it. I had betrayed a man who was already broken, a man my soul recognized as its own. The image of his face when I confessed was burned into my mind. The raw pain, the flicker of hope extinguished, the descent into cold fury. I had done that. I had taken his grief and twisted a knife in the wound. But then I thought of Lyra. Sweet, innocent Lyra, still in Silas's clutches. My death wouldn't save her. Silas was not a man who honors bargains. Once he learned of my failure, he would discard her without a second thought. She was a loose end, a liability. Panic, fierce and primal, clawed its way up my throat. I couldn't die, not yet. I had to get to Lyra. And then there was Kalen. Silas's words echoed in my mind, twisting the truth into a monstrous lie. Kalen is a butcher. He slaughtered the innocent to steal a throne. But what I had seen didn't align with that story. The sorrow in his eyes, the child's toy in the drawer, it all pointed to a different narrative, one where Kalen was the victim, not the villain. What if Silas was the true monster? What if I had been a pawn in the game of a madman, sent to destroy the one person who could stop him? The thought was a sliver of ice in my gut. I had to know the truth, and I had to save my sister. My resolve hardened. I was not just a spy. I was a shifter, a wolf of the Shadowclaw. My lineage was not as prestigious as the Silvermoon, but we were known for our cunning, our ability to move unseen. Silas had trained me to be a weapon, and now I would turn that weapon against him. I took a deep, steadying breath, pushing aside my grief and fear, channeling it into a cold, hard knot of determination. I began to assess my prison. The cell was solid stone, the door iron. There was no escape, not through conventional means. But I had one more secret, a skill so minor and suppressed that even Silas didn't know its full extent. My grandmother had called it listening to the whispers. I could feel the weaknesses in things, the hidden seams and fractures. I pressed my hands against the stone wall, closed my eyes, and listened. I pushed my senses out, past the cold stone, through the mortar, feeling for the subtle vibrations of the citadel around me. It was a strain, a deep drain on my energy, but I pushed harder, desperation lending me strength. I felt the slow drip of water in a cistern, the scuttling of a rat in the walls, the steady tread of the guard pacing down the corridor. And then I felt it, a hairline fracture in the mortar behind a loose stone near the floor. It was small, but it was a start. Using the edge of my metal food tray, I began to scrape at the mortar. It was slow, agonizing work. Hours passed. My fingers were raw and bleeding, my muscles screaming in protest. But the image of Lyra's face, pale and frightened, drove me on. Finally, the stone loosened. I pulled it free and peered into the darkness beyond. It was a narrow, forgotten maintenance tunnel, barely wide enough for me to squeeze through. I didn't hesitate. I slipped into the tunnel, the darkness absolute, the air thick with the smell of dust and decay. I moved by touch, my hands scraping against the rough-hewn stone, listening to the whispers of the citadel to guide me. I needed to get out, but more than that, I needed to find proof of Silas's treachery. I needed something to convince Cailan, to make him see that I was not his enemy. His study. The locked drawer hadn't held war plans, but maybe his desk held something else. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was the only one I had. Navigating the labyrinthine tunnels was a nightmare, but my strange sense of the citadel's structure guided me. I emerged through a grate in the floor of a dusty, unused storage room, not far from the royal wing. My heart pounded as I crept through the silent corridors, a ghost in the halls I had so recently walked as a servant. Every shadow seemed to hold a guard, every gust of wind sounded like an alarm. I reached his chambers, the door unguarded. They likely thought me secure in the dungeons below. I slipped inside. The room was just as I had left it, but the air was cold, the fire long dead. The lingering scent of his rage and pain hung in the air like a phantom. I went straight to his desk. The bottom drawer was locked again. I picked it with trembling fingers, my earlier guilt now replaced by a frantic urgency. The drawer slid open, revealing the small wooden wolf and the lock of hair. I ignored them, my fingers searching the underside of the drawer, the hidden corners of the compartment. My hand brushed against a false bottom. With a surge of adrenaline, I pried it open. Beneath it lay a single leather-bound journal. It wasn't a king's ledger, it was personal. His handwriting was stark and black, slashing across the page. With trembling hands, I opened it. The first entry was dated 5 years ago. My blood ran cold as I read. It was Cailan's account of the night his world ended. He wrote of his mate, Lyanna, a silver-blonde wolf with a laugh like wind chimes. He wrote of their unborn son, a new hope for the Silvermoon Pack. And he wrote of the betrayal. It wasn't Cailan who was the usurper. It was Silas. Silas, then a trusted member of the Alpha's council, had been in league with a rival pack. He had orchestrated a coup, letting the enemy warriors into the citadel. They had murdered the old Alpha, Cailan's father. And in the chaos, they had cornered Lyanna. Cailan had arrived too late. He found her lifeless, their son gone with her. The entry was stained with what could only be tears. He wrote of his roaring rampage of grief, of how he and his loyal warriors had hunted down every last traitor. He had taken the Alpha title not out of ambition, but out of necessity, to hold the fractured pack together, to prevent a bloody civil war. His harsh rules, his so-called tyranny, were the desperate measures of a broken man trying to protect his people from ever suffering such a loss again. Silas had escaped, spinning a tale of his own victimhood, branding Cailan a monster to rally the disenfranchised and continue his quest for power. Everything was a lie. My entire life for the past year had been built on the manipulations of the man who had murdered Kalen's family. Sickness rose in my throat, hot and acidic. I had been sent to torment a man who had already endured hell. I was a weapon in the hands of his mate's murderer. A noise in the corridor outside jolted me from my horrified trance. I had to move. I couldn't take the journal. Its absence would be noticed immediately. But I needed proof. I ripped out a single page from the back, a page detailing Silas's known associates, and tucked it into my bodice. I closed the journal, replaced the false bottom, and shut the drawer, locking it just as I'd found it. My new mission was clear. I wasn't escaping for myself, or even just for Lyra. I was going to expose Silas. I had to warn Kalen. I slipped from his chambers and melted back into the shadows. But I didn't head for the outer walls. I went in search of the one person who might listen, the one person whose loyalty to Kalen was absolute, his beta, Ronan. I found him in the armory, overseeing the changing of the guard. He was a hard man, his face carved from granite, his eyes missing nothing. Cornering him was a risk, but I was out of options. I waited until he was alone, then stepped from the shadows. He spun around, a dagger appearing in his hand as if by magic. His eyes widened in shock when he saw me. "You! How did you escape?" "There's no time," I said, my voice low and urgent. "You have to listen to me. Your pack is in danger." He sneered, his lip curling. "The only danger here is the spy standing in front of me." "I was a spy," I corrected, taking a step closer, my hands raised in a gesture of peace. "But I was deceived. We were all deceived. Silas is the traitor. He murdered Kalen's father. He murdered his mate." Ronan's face went pale, his knuckles white on the hilt of his dagger. "Lies. Silas was a victim of the Alpha King's bloody conquest." "That's the story he told you. The story he told everyone," I insisted, pulling the journal page from my dress. "This is from Kalen's private journal." It lists Silas's known allies, members of the Bloodfang Pack, the same pack that attacked the Citadel 5 years ago. Why would a victim be allied with his family's murderers? Ronan snatched the page from my hand, his eyes scanning the list of names. I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes, the dawning horror as the pieces began to click into place. "Where did you get this?" "From a place I never should have been," I admitted, my voice thick with shame. "Look, I know you have no reason to trust me. I betrayed your Alpha, but I am not his enemy. Silas has my sister. He's holding her to ensure my loyalty. But now that I'm compromised, he won't hesitate to kill her. And he's going to attack. He knows the Citadel's weaknesses because I told him." The weight of my confession hung in the air between us. Ronan stared at me, his expression unreadable. I had just handed him the means to my own execution, but I also saw a glimmer of understanding in his cold eyes. He was a beta. His purpose was to protect his Alpha, and he could sense the undeniable truth in my words. "He uses the old aqueduct tunnels on the western face," I said quickly. "He thinks they are unguarded. He'll strike at moonrise when the guard is changing." Ronan's jaw was tight. He looked from the page to my face, his internal battle waging. Finally, he gave a sharp, decisive nod. "If you are lying, I will kill you myself, slowly." He turned, shouting orders to a nearby warrior. "Sound the alarm! Muster the sentinels at the western wall! A breach is imminent!" The Citadel erupted into a controlled chaos of ringing bells and running feet. Ronan grabbed my arm. But this time, it wasn't the rough grip of a jailer. It was the firm hold of a reluctant ally. "You'll come with me. The Alpha King will want to see his traitorous mate." The word mate still sent a jolt through me, a mix of pain and longing. Ronan dragged me toward the main keep. We found Kaelin on the battlements, already dressed in his battle leathers, his greatsword strapped to his back. He was staring out at the rising moon, his face a grim mask. When he saw me, his eyes blazed with fresh fury. "What is the meaning of this, Ronan? I ordered her locked away." "She escaped, Alpha, and she brought us this," Ronan said, handing him the journal page. "She claims Silas is the traitor, that he will attack through the western aqueducts at any moment." Kaelin's gaze flickered over the page. His face, already grim, seemed to turn to stone. The names on that list were ghosts from his past, wolves he knew to be responsible for Lyanna's death. He looked at me, his golden eyes a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. "You expect me to believe this? A convenient story from a spy caught red-handed?" "It's the truth," I pleaded, my voice breaking. "Silas manipulated me. He has my sister. I did what I did to save her, but I was wrong. I see that now. He's the monster, Kaelin, not you." As if on cue, a horn blast echoed from the western side of the citadel, followed by the clash of steel and the roar of fighting wolves. The attack had begun. Kaelin's eyes locked with mine. For a heart-stopping second, I saw everything in them. His doubt, his rage, his grief, and a tiny, fragile flicker of hope. He wanted to believe me. His wolf, his soul, wanted to believe me. "Stay by my side," he growled, the command absolute. He drew his massive sword, the blade singing in the cool night air. "If this is another layer of your betrayal, you will not live to see the dawn." He didn't wait for a reply, turning and sprinting toward the sounds of battle, a king going to war for his people. With Ronan on one side and Kaelin just ahead, I ran with them, my heart pounding with a terrifying mix of fear and a strange, fierce sense of belonging. I was running into battle beside my mate to fight the man who had ruined both our lives. This was my only path to redemption. The fighting at the Western Wall was a brutal, swirling vortex of chaos. Shadowclaw and Bloodfang warriors poured from the aqueduct opening, crashing against the shield wall of the Silvermoon Sentinels. Kaelin was a force of nature, his greatsword a blur of silver death, cutting a swath through the enemy ranks. He moved with a purpose that was both terrifying and magnificent, the embodiment of a king protecting his home. I was unarmed, useless in the main fray. My skills were in stealth and subterfuge, not open warfare. I stayed close to the wall, my eyes scanning the chaos, searching for two faces, Silas and Lyra. Silas would be here, overseeing his victory, and he would have my sister, his final piece of leverage. I saw him near the mouth of the tunnel, directing his warriors, a cruel smirk on his face. And beside him, held tight by a burly Bloodfang warrior, was Lyra. Her eyes were wide with terror, her face pale in the moonlight. A rope was around her neck, the end held tightly in Silas's hand. My blood ran cold. "Kaelin!" I screamed, pointing. "Silas has my sister!" Kaelin's head whipped around. His eyes followed my gesture, and for a moment, he froze. He saw Silas, but more than that, he saw the innocent girl held captive, a pawn in a war she didn't understand. I saw the ghost of Lyanna in his eyes, the memory of another woman he had failed to save. With a roar of pure fury, he began to fight his way toward them, his movements growing more reckless, more desperate. Silas saw him coming. His smirk widened into a triumphant grin. This was what he wanted, to draw Kaelin into a one-on-one fight, to distract him, to break him. "Elara, my pet," he called out, his voice carrying over the din of battle. "Your little charade is over. Look what I have, your precious sister. Kill the Alpha King for me, and I might let her live." He gave the rope a sharp tug. Lyra cried out, choking. The world narrowed to that single, horrific tableau. The man I was fated to love, the sister I had sworn to protect, and the monster who stood between them. I was frozen, torn by an impossible choice. Kalen was battling two Bloodfangs who were trying to block his path, his eyes fixed on me, his face a mask of torment. He was willing to die for this girl he didn't even know because he wouldn't let history repeat itself. He wouldn't watch another innocent fall. That selfless agony in his eyes broke through my paralysis. I knew what I had to do. My loyalty was no longer divided. Silas had underestimated me. He saw me as a pawn, a tool. He didn't know the strength of a wolf fighting for her pack, for her mate. With a cry of rage, I launched myself forward. Not at Silas. I scrambled up a pile of rubble against the citadel wall, gaining height. Silas watched me, his eyes gleaming with anticipation, thinking I was coming for him. "That's it, my pet," he hissed. "Choose." From my new vantage point, I could see the whole scene. Kalen was about to dispatch the last of his opponents. Silas held the rope, his attention now split between me and the approaching Alpha King. The warrior holding Lyra was distracted, turning his head to watch the fight. It was the only opening I would get. I leaped. I flew through the air, aiming not for Silas, but for the warrior holding my sister. I slammed into him with all my weight, my momentum carrying us both to the ground. Lyra stumbled free, gasping for air. "Run!" I screamed at her, shoving her toward the safety of the Silvermoon line. Silas roared in frustration, his trap ruined. He dropped the now useless rope and drew his own sword just as Kalen reached him. The two alphas, the true and the pretender, crashed together in a shower of sparks, their blades a blur of hate-fueled fury. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing a fallen sword. I was no match for a trained warrior, but I would not stand by and do nothing. I engaged the Bloodfang I had tackled, my movements clumsy but desperate. He was stronger, more skilled, and he quickly disarmed me, sending my sword skittering across the stones. He raised his own blade for the killing blow. Suddenly, a silver blur intervened. Ronan. He engaged the Bloodfang, his own daggers a precise and deadly dance. "Get to the king," he grunted, parrying a vicious swing. "He needs you." I looked over at the duel. Kalen was the stronger wolf, but Silas was fighting with the feral abandon of a cornered snake. He was landing small, shallow cuts, wearing the Alpha King down. Kalen was fighting for his kingdom, for his past. Silas was fighting for nothing but his own twisted ambition, and that made him dangerously unpredictable. As I watched, Silas fainted high and then kicked Kalen's knee, sending the larger wolf stumbling. Kalen roared in pain, and Silas raised his sword for a final, decisive strike at his exposed neck. There was no time to think. I threw myself forward, putting my body between Silas's blade and my mate. Pain, white-hot and blinding, exploded in my back. The sword sliced through leather and flesh, a searing line of agony. I cried out, collapsing against Kalen, my strength vanishing in an instant. His arms came around me, holding me up, his eyes wide with horror and disbelief. My sacrifice, my willingness to die for him, broke something in him. His grief-stricken eyes cleared, the haunted shadows replaced by a pure, elemental fire. The fury of a mated alpha whose female has been harmed. He laid me gently on the ground, pressing a hand to my wound. Then he rose, his golden eyes fixed on Silas. A low, terrifying growl rumbled in his chest, the sound of impending death. He was no longer just a king or a man. He was vengeance. He moved faster than I thought possible. His great sword was no longer a weapon. It was an extension of his wrath. Silas, for all his treachery, was no match for the full, unrestrained power of a true alpha fighting for his mate. The fight was short, brutal, and decisive. With a final, desperate parry, Silas's sword was sent flying. Kaelin's blade sank deep into the traitor's chest. Silas looked down in shock, a gurgle escaping his lips before collapsing to the ground, dead. The battle seemed to halt for a moment. The remaining invaders, seeing their leader fall, wavered. Ronan and the Silver Moon warriors surged forward, and the enemy broke, fleeing back into the tunnels or surrendering. The war was over. Kaelin rushed back to my side, dropping to his knees. He gently turned me over, his face pale beneath the grime of battle. "Ilara," he breathed, his voice thick with a terror I had never heard from him. "Is it over?" I whispered, the world starting to go dark at the edges. "It's over," he said, his hand stroking my hair back from my face. "You're safe." He ripped a strip of cloth from his tunic, pressing it against the gash on my back. The pain was immense, but it was nothing compared to the relief flooding through me. Lyra was safe. Kaelin was safe. In front of his entire pack, amidst the dead and the dying, the Alpha King lowered his head. His eyes blazing with an emotion so powerful it took my breath away, locked onto mine. There was possession in them, and reverence, and a fierce, unwavering promise. He leaned down, his lips brushing against my ear. "Mine," he growled, the single word a sacred vow. Then he moved to my neck. I felt the sharp prick of his canines against my skin. There was a brief, intense flare of pain, and then a wave of warmth, of pure energy flooding my body, chasing away the encroaching darkness. It was the bite, the mark of a mate, a claim made in blood and battle. The frayed, broken cord of our bond slammed back into place, whole and vibrant, a humming, unbreakable chain that tied my soul to his. I gasped, my body shuddering as his power flowed into me, stabilizing me, healing me. The last thing I saw before I lost consciousness was his face, his golden eyes full of anguish and a love so fierce it burned away all the shadows of the past. I had forgotten my mission, but in doing so, I had found my destiny. I woke to the smell of antiseptic herbs and the soft touch of linen sheets. I was in a grand bedchamber, sunlight streaming through a large window. My back throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, but the life-threatening sharpness of the pain was gone. I was bandaged, clean, and alive. A movement beside the bed made me turn my head. Lyra was there, asleep in a chair, her hand resting on the edge of my mattress. Her face was tear-streaked but peaceful. She was safe. The relief was so profound it felt like a physical weight lifting from my chest. The door opened softly, and Kaelin entered. He looked weary, the lines of exhaustion deep on his face, but the crushing weight of grief that had always haunted his eyes was gone. He saw that I was awake, and a slow, genuine smile transformed his face. He dismissed the healer who followed him in with a nod, and came to sit on the edge of the bed, taking my hand in his. His touch was warm and gentle, sending a now familiar hum of energy through me. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice low. "Like I was stabbed," I said, my own voice raspy. A small smile touched my lips. "But I'll live." "The healers say my mark saved you," he said, his thumb tracing patterns on my knuckles. "It shared my strength with you, kept you from bleeding out." "Thank you," I whispered. He shook his head, his golden eyes serious. "No, Ilara, thank you. You saved me. Not just from Silas's blade, but from everything else." He looked toward the window, at the kingdom that was now peaceful. For 5 years, I have been a ghost, ruling, fighting, breathing, but not living. My pack saw an alpha. All I saw was the man who had failed to protect his family. He met my gaze again, his vulnerability a raw, open thing. When Silas threatened your sister, I felt it all again. The helplessness, the rage. And when you threw yourself in front of that sword for me, you broke the curse. You showed me that I could feel something other than grief, that I could live again. I squeezed his hand. You lost so much. I can't imagine that pain. Lyanna was my first love, my fated mate, he said softly, the words holding sorrow but not the sharp agony of before. I will honor her memory always. But the moon goddess, in her strange wisdom, has given me a second chance, a second mate. His eyes searched mine. If you will have me, a broken king with a haunted past. Tears streamed down my cheeks, but they were tears of joy, of release. You're not broken, I whispered. You're the strongest man I've ever known. And I am a spy who was sent to betray you, a woman with a false name and 1,000 lies. Those lies are in the past, he said firmly. I don't see a spy. I see the brave wolf who saved her sister. I see the woman who saved my pack. I see Elara, my mate, my queen. He leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a kiss of desperate battlefield passion. It was slow, tender, and full of promises. It spoke of slow healing, of shared burdens, and of a future built not on forgetting the past, but on building a new life from its ashes. When he pulled away, he rested his forehead against mine. Lyra stirred in her chair, her eyes fluttering open. She saw us, and a wide, relieved smile spread across her face. My past and my future, all in one room. Later that evening, Kaelin helped me walk to the balcony adjoining the chamber. The moon was high and full, bathing the valley in a soft, silvery light. The air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of pine from the forests below. He wrapped a fur cloak around my shoulders and pulled me back against his chest, his arms a circle of warmth and safety around me. We stood in comfortable silence for a long time, watching the peaceful kingdom spread out before us. The scars of our past would always be there. His grief for Lyanna, my guilt for my deception. But they were no longer gaping wounds. They were a part of our story, the foundation of the fierce, unbreakable bond we now shared. He had been a king cloaked in sorrow, and I had been a spy driven by fear. But together, under the watchful eye of the moon, we were simply two halves of a whole, finally at peace. He leaned down, his lips brushing against the new, permanent mark on my neck. Elara, he murmured, my true name a prayer and a promise. It was the only word that mattered. It was the beginning of everything.